Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. From wherever you're at, welcome to another exciting episode of Data Dynamics webinar. Today, we're going to talk about unstructured data risk, exposed, the expert's insight. So first, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Kwang Lee, I'm your host today. And I'm joined by Danny O'Connor. Danny, you'd like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. Danny O'Connor. I'm a field CTO at Data Dynamics. But prior to that, I spent 30 plus years in financial services running infrastructure technologies.
You want to speak more about that, Danny? Because I always think it's great whenever we have this webinar, we talk to people who've done the work in the industry.
Yeah, good point. The world has changed massively. I'll just focus on one area. So back in the day, and I'm talking the 80s, 90s, and early millennials, I hosted requirements for compute and data. So I was responsible for the storage footprint. And back then, all we cared about was being able to provide enough infrastructure to house the ever-growing storage requirements and increase in data. We didn't know what the data was, but we didn't really care. And as long as we could get a better bang for the buck on the next storage array, we were doing a good job. But of course, now that's changed hugely, and people need to know and need to care about the data that they're either custodians of, or actually they need to care about data that's relevant or pertinent to them or their clients. So it's a big shift. Throwing tin at your problem is not the answer anymore.
Well, it's incredible when you think about how much data is out there and how much it's been growing. And as you're saying, people were just buying technology and getting things to be able to contain what they had.
So like if you look at that slide, data deluge, right? 175 zettabytes by 2025. That's just crazy growth. But I suppose I asked the question again, who's managing it? Who is responsible for ensuring they know what that is? And who cares? Who's accountable for it? And I think there's still a challenge out there with regards to people who actually take responsibility for it. And if you look at some of those other stats, right? 60% of organizations have no visibility into their unstructured data. So they could be missing out on valuable information. They could improve their operations, make better decisions, get a competitive advantage. But quite often it's because the data is siloed across different departments or systems. And ultimately, again, back to my point, who's responsible? Who owns it at a holistic level? And across a whole company or enterprise, you're going to waste resources and you're going to increase risk. And obviously, when you get into operational efficiency, no plan. 50% have no plan on managing their unstructured data. So my question there is, who's going to get fired then? Out of 50%, who gets fired if there's no plan and then there's a security breach or there's a regulatory requirement where there's a big fine for coming along behind it? And then, of course, finally, if you don't know your data, you don't know where it is, you're exposing yourself to breaches, right? Hackers, cyber criminals, governments that are unfriendly, trying to get into your systems. And then, of course, you have to trust your people, but your people will always let you down. There's always human error. There's always poor security practices or practices that people don't adhere to. So there's a whole load of exposure across those things. So I'll go back to my original point. Who is responsible? Who is accountable? And who's doing something about it? And I think on this next slide, Kwang, you've got some more concerns.
Well, it's interesting as you mentioned that, because a lot of times people will say, well, we're all responsible. As a good corporate citizen, we are all responsible for it. And it's interesting because anytime you talk about shared responsibility means no responsibility. and that's unfortunate how often, we see that. So now if you think about what are some of the risks, that are out there, one of them is you have inadequate access controls. So in a lot of organizations, they don't really have a way of being able to make sure that only the right people have access to data that they must have. Now, what this does is this creates a number of different data security and privacy risks. So 70% of all data breaches involve unstructured data. That's one of the things that's happening over and over and over again, because it's data that's not managed. It's not data that you're not managing effectively. And then when we look at what is the cost and the impact of not being able to manage your data, there's a whole entire issues with non-compliance, the fines that you get with GDPR and CCPA and so forth. But more importantly, it's the fact that consumers lose trust in your brand. They lose trust in you. And so this is going to be very important as we look forward. Creating that trust is a very challenging, very tough thing to do. Being able to keep that trust is going to be very important for many enterprises. So it's going to be important for you to be able to manage your data and understand what the risks are and effectively manage it in order to be able to maintain your brand and your identity. Danny, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. One thing I focus in on, Kwong, is, whenever you have some sort of data breach or you have a fine from a regulator for non-compliance, it's always in the public domain. So that, you can look it up and find it, who got the last fine. There's even websites that track on a month-by-month basis which companies got fined, what they got fined for, and how big the fine was. So you're right. And if you want to, build brand loyalty, that's not the way to do it.
That's right. The worst nightmare for a PR person is to see your company show up on the wall of shame when it comes down to privacy and handling the consumer's data or sensitive information.
Yeah.
So right now, I'd like to take a quick poll and just get your thoughts. What you think. What are some of the things that you're seeing as key types of risk with unstructured data? And so there's a couple of different items here. One is around, are your biggest concerns around data breaches? Is the biggest risk around compliance violations, lost opportunities, reduced productivity, or increased costs? So we'll give everyone about another 45 seconds or so to go ahead and answer this. And, in the meantime, Danny, you've been looking, at a number of these types of things, in the past, and it'd be real interesting, to see, like what you think. We don't want to bias anyone yet, not until the vote's done, but it'd be interesting to see what you think with each one of these, with what our audience here thinks, because I think there's going to be probably a lot of similarities. I mean, for me, many times I say, I wish I could say all of them, right? Because in some sense, you have that. All right, so 5 more seconds, everyone. Okay, all right. Well, that's the end of the poll. Thank you so much for sharing that. And let me see, what were the results of the poll? The results of the poll was that data breaches was 60% of what the biggest risks are. And then there was the next tier was compliance violations and lost opportunities. Those were the 3 in terms of risk. What do you think about that, Danny?
Yeah, so I think, that's consistent with my thinking and some of the conversations I've had actually fairly recently with a number of financial services. The data breaches, the reason the data breaches are so important is because they tend to be real time. It's now. You have to do something. So you need to do your monitoring. You need to make sure that if there's any abnormalities against policy or whatever, that you identify those quickly. And then when you do identify them, you need to do something. You need to rectify really, really quickly, because otherwise you open yourself up back to trustworthiness and risk to the organization and hackers and all that other good stuff. So generally in FS, a data breach will be the thing that sets all the alarm bells running. And what's worse than getting a data breach and having to, rally the troops to respond is not knowing you've had a data breach until some point in the future, because then you have to try and find out what damage has been done. So, yeah, I would say the data breach thing.
Yeah, I mean, that would make sense. And sometimes just being able to prevent it and have better security practices to begin with to prevent the data breaches. A lot of times, what is it? An ounce of prevention beats a pound of cure.
Yes, that's true.
So we're going to go over what are some of the ways in which you can handle and manage the risk. Because as we were talking about the risk, I think there's some real examples of this that we've had with a number of organizations is even simple things like username passwords are like stored in clear text, so that if someone's able to breach your data, they're able, there may be exposures in terms of that, or PII information, people's credit card numbers, phone numbers, email address, a number of those things. So this here is going to go through a 4-pronged risk mitigation strategy, which is going to look at how do you unify and optimize your strategy? How do you detect and rectify it? How do you review and regulate? And then categorize and transition.
Yeah, I think there's one other thing there, Kwon, which is making sure that you continue to manage it. It's not a one-off, and I think that's a common theme, right? So when you look through this first slide here, there's a number of things. Smart data ID, right? That's a great way to classify and tag and index unstructured data. But the thing is, obviously, there's different classifications depending on what vertical you're in, whether it's customer data, financial or intellectual. But one of the things to be aware of, it actually doing this can be quite complex. So as an organization, you need to think very carefully about what it is you're trying to do and who needs to be involved in it. And it's a bit like the same with the risk analysis. You've got to make sure all the right stakeholders from across the organization are involved in the risk analysis process. It gives you a better chance of understanding what they all are. Data minimization. If you go back to like a more holistic view, figure out what you got, figure out what you need, make sure that you keep the things that you do need and make sure you manage it appropriately. So data minimization is a great thing to do. It will also help reduce the rate of growth across your footprint. I didn't mention it before, but if you're growing your storage footprint because you're just throwing more and more data at your tin, you're going to end up with more data centers. That's not eco-friendly, and it also reduces your security. The more data you have lying around in various places, the more susceptible it is for abuse. But yeah, data minimization, I think, is a really good thing, especially orphan data. We've seen so many times when we've gone and run our analytics, companies who, they have multi-petabytes of footprint, but actually they, 70% of it never gets looked at and never gets accessed. And yet there they are, replicating it, backing it up, copying it, and then buying more storage on a regular basis. So yeah, I think orphan data is a good thing to look at. And obviously more than just orphan data is doing something about the redundant data. Get rid of the stuff that you don't need. Archive it off to lower tiers, move it off somewhere else, or best delete it. And of course, once you've done that and you've tidied it all up, you need to manage the environment on an ongoing basis. So, you need to do things to make sure that you don't go back to the bad practices of just exponentially increasing your data footprint. So you need to classify properly, have good data retention policies, introduce archiving, something we always recommend, basically remove deduplication, and then maybe in some cases do some compression as well. They are things that will help you manage your growth, or at least slow up your growth. I don't think we can stop the tide, but I think we can slow it up on coming in.
Yeah, I mean that certainly makes sense, because once you have that process and you have that ongoing capability, then it's really around how do I detect and identify the various issues within the data? Where can I find the risk? And this is going to be very important because if you think about how much work and effort it's going to take if you try to do this manually, or if you have every individual to try to go do this. So this is where technologies such as AI-driven capabilities to do sensitive data discovery and analysis and risk identification is going to be very important. But identifying the risk is the first. As you were talking about, Danny, it's going to be very important to be able to take actions on those risks and then be able to make sure that you're being proactive around it.
So I do know. Sorry,
do.
Bob, to interrupt. I do know a bank that I was talking to fairly recently who had they were concerned about data within their unstructured environment that was sensitive but was not protected, and they needed to find that data. They knew what they were looking for, but they didn't have the tooling to do it. So they were doing it manually. They had people going through file structures and interrogating files to find specific strings. When I spoke with the guy who was doing it, he said, if there was a tool that does it, I said, yeah, we can do that. He said, you can do all of this? I said, yeah. He said, well, I'm going to have to get a business case together to justify the spend. I said, so how do you do it today? He said, I have people. I said, how many people? He said, 600. He had 600 people manually trawling through file directories to try and find some specific keywords and strings. And it's like, just madness, right? Just madness.
It is such a daunting task. And so it becomes really important to be able to invest, not only build in terms of a strategy and how you do this, but also be able to make it scale across a large enterprise. And then leveraging technologies and automation and policies in order to be able to do that, and ensuring that you're doing an effective governance. Because the worst thing is, if you're not being proactive in managing your data, you're going to be managed by your data. You're going to be managed by the events, that end up happening, which happens, way too often. So Danny, I mean, you've been looking at a lot of this from regulations and other types of things. What are some of the things that that customers and others should make sure that they go and do in order to protect themselves?
Yeah, the regulators are definitely taking more interest in how people. Well, there's two things, right? There is personal data, which is information about Danny O'Connor, and I have every right to ask anyone who has that information to show me what they've got about me. There was a big case in the UK recently where a right-wing politician had his Coutts bank account suspended, cancelled actually, allegedly based on the fact that he didn't meet the financial requirements to have that account. It's a fairly exclusive bank, Coutts Bank. It's under NatWest now, but it's the Queen's Bank and all that other good stuff. He said, I don't believe that's the reason my account was shut down. And so he did a subject access request. So basically he went to the bank and said, I want to see every bit of information, every bit of documentation you have about me. And they duly produced that information for him. I don't know how long it took. And within that information were the minutes of a meeting where they discussed stopping his account for reasons other than financial, which obviously then became a huge story. So there is the personal information side. There is the responsibility of the custodians of that data, which in this case was the bank. And they obviously were not sharing things that they'd done with his data with him or asked for consent. And I think what you're seeing is the regulators are now starting to get into this space. It's, how do the custodians manage and control client or personal data? And how do they evidence that they're managing that in an appropriate way? So you need to identify the data. You need to make sure there's appropriate controls, monitor compliance. The regulators will actually now want to see how you monitor ongoing compliance. Again, it's not just a one-off exercise. And there's things you can do, right? There's standard templates out there. You can get legal counsel. There's a number of things. And again, involve all the right stakeholders. Other things you can do, immutable audit logs, always very important. Regulators want to make sure that the things that you track are a fair reflection of what you've tracked and nothing has been changed and nothing has been... and again, you need to prove that. You will need to share that with them. And that leads towards trustworthiness. If you are compliant and you can demonstrate your policies and controls on a regular basis, you actually build up trustworthiness with the external regulators as well as the market. We've mentioned before anomaly detection. If you're tracking and monitoring patterns and behaviors, anything that is outside of that could indicate some sort of threat. So again, you need to demonstrate that you're doing that, and obviously real-time monitoring. And And another one that's quite important is your alerts. You want to make them customizable because different people want different things, right? If it's a data breach, you want to make sure your CISO and the people who can manage the firewalls can shut things down immediately. Other people may just need an email or just need some sort of notification. So it's not a one size system fits all. You need to be able to react and communicate depending on what the breach is, and different parts of the organization need different things. And finally, I suppose, scalability, as again, if you can control the way you scale in a controlled manner, the regulator, it will be much easier to deal with the regulators. So you've got to understand what you got, how you manage it, and report it back when requested, because they'll always come in and ask for something you haven't got. Your ability, it's how quickly you can go, I will get that for you. And also, they will ask you to demonstrate that you're meeting your own internal policies. So if you say, I'm going to keep email for 5 years, they go, we want to see this email from 4 years and 6 months ago for this person. Can you get that for me? And because that's your policy, you have to do it. If your policy is we're only keeping stuff for a year, you only have to go back a year. But woe betide if you can't recover that one email that they asked for when they come in and test you out.
Well, sometimes what's even worse is that if you put in a retention policy of, let's say, 5 years for a certain set of documents, but you don't have an active program to actually go and manage that and prune that and do and delete that, you're accountable for all of that beyond your policy as well, in any type of discovery or regulatory action.
Again, it comes back, Kwong, and I don't know what the answer is. Who's responsible? The person who set the policy, the person whose email is, the people who are managing the environment that data sits on. Is it the CISO for the company? Is it the people who deal with the regulator? Who is the who gets fired? Who gets fired if you get asked one of these things and you can't do it? It used to be in my day, we'd all do this. It was over there, it's over there, and then we just sort of bounce them around. But I don't think you can now. I think people can get fired if they're in the appropriate position of responsibility. Yeah,
well, I mean, let's make sure that none of that happens to anyone on this call, because then it's about, well, how do you more intelligently do this? Because what ends up happening all the time is that there's newer technologies, there's various different clouds, there's things that you need to go adopt for your business, and many of them help enhance the security posture, the data security posture of the company. And so it's going to be very important to be able to categorize all of the data that you have, and then be able to ensure that you're putting the right policies in place on how data is going to be shared and how data is going to be migrated to various different clouds or data stores or those types of things. While doing so, making sure that there's a consistency. So for example, if you're dealing with data on-prem, you might be using Microsoft Information Protection, but then when it's up on Azure and OneDrive is Azure Information Protection, and ensuring that the things that you've created for DLP on-prem is also available for you on the cloud, and so on and so forth. And there's a whole myriad and variety in terms of platforms that you have to go and do this, as well as how do you manage the cost and drive efficiency across all of that, and do your risk management across the multi-cloud as well as on-premise. And these are all very significant concerns and challenges that enterprises have. So our favorite time for another poll. So when dealing with unstructured data, which data privacy concern do you think is most significant? And so your choices are unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information, difficulty in anonymizing data, lack of control over data sharing, and incomplete data erasure. So we'll give everyone about a minute or so, and Danny, I'd like to get your take, as everyone's going through this, what you think, about these various types of
Go through the four again. I don't see the four options. Let's go through the four again.
It's on the polls. It's unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information, difficulty in anonymizing data, lack of control over data sharing, and incomplete data erasure.
Yeah, ooh, that's a good one. I think they're all pretty important, so it's a tough one, right? But I would say,
hold on, Denny, hold on. Everyone's got
okay.
15 seconds left to be heard. 15
I was getting too excited then.
No, not yet. You know, I'm giving everyone 8 more
I'll
seconds.
write down what I think it is, and then we'll see how that goes against the poll. Right?
Yeah. It's a unanimous decision. So what do you think, Danny?
Oh, what is it? What's the unanimous decision?
Unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information.
Yeah.
As the number one, and it's by a landslide. I mean, no one picked any other one. Everyone picked that one.
Yeah. And as I mentioned before, you know, that is a hot topic at the moment, and it's a consent management, right? It comes down to do I give my consent for somebody who has information about me to use that in various things, especially in healthcare, I think, where it's a difficult one, because I think there's a huge benefit of sharing healthcare information across, you know, multiple trusts or multiple areas, and then doing some analytics. I think that could drive better medication and all that type of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's very personal. And now you're getting wearable devices, which is transmitting your data directly up to some cloud somewhere. Who knows what's happening to it up there? So I think there's a lot of good from that, but I think somehow it needs to be governed and controlled. I haven't got the answer of how they do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's when it's unmanaged, and when you as a consumer know that it's not being managed or managed effectively, it does create a lot of issues with trust. You know, trust in the brand.
Back to trust.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes down to. And so, you know, case study, you know, and so I know you're very familiar with this one, Danny. So you want to just talk about this?
So I'll be very careful not to say who it was. So this was an interesting one. The financial services company were looking to do a data center consolidation. So when you do a data center consolidation, or you do a migration or something like that, it's always a good time to look at the way you manage your data. And actually, I would say don't wait until you have a major event until you look at it. Look at it now, because you'll be better prepared. But what they said was, right, we're going to do that. We want to make the right decisions for the right reasons. So we need to understand what our data is. So when they looked into it, they realized they'd had years of data sprawl, and they really didn't know what it was, where it was, how important it was, who owned it, how sensitive it was, and what they should do with it. So we got involved. We helped them understand that. We identified the data. We ran some analysis on it, understood by working with the business units the right risk classification and how important it was for various businesses, and then introduced some things like, you know, role-based access control and immutable audit logging and data lifecycle management. So we took it from understanding, supported them in their data consolidation program, and ended up day one having a much better and understood environment than they had before they started the program. So they fixed a number of issues and concerns as part of a data center migration. And at the end of it, they put in appropriate control. You're using the right tooling and software. They put in appropriate controls to make sure they don't get that in that state again. But what was interesting is, as part of that program, they found 21,000 files which had sensitive data, which was not in a secured environment. And of course, by identifying that, the regulators love that. If the regulators come in and find a weakness, they'll give you 3 months to go get it fixed. But if you can say, we've identified our own weakness and we have remediated, you get a big tick in the box. But trust me, they'll find something else. But you'll get a big tick in the box for doing the right thing. So it's a really, on the back of something that seemed quite basic, they actually got a ton of value out of actually doing the program and the project and fixing stuff and doing it. I've tried to do it in the past, and in the end, I've shifted tin and moved all of the rubbish data onto a new environment, right? It's hard to do, but if you can have the discipline and you have the time and the cycles and the tooling, it's definitely worth doing when you have those big change events.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I remember it was rather significant for this client. And it was one of those situations where predecessors upon predecessors push that tin over to the next person.
Yeah.
letting everyone else hold the bag, right? But eventually the bill came due, and it had to be addressed. And it's much more expensive to address it after than it is to do it during.
Correct.
So time for a quick set of Q&As. So we'll please feel free to put any questions that you have up on the chat. And what we'll do is, between Danny and myself, we'll do what we can to help you with that.
And also feel free to contact us outside of this, right? I mean, we're more than happy, Kwong, to take questions and share more stories about some of the things we've seen and experienced. Yeah,
so Danny, one of the comments I see here in the chat is organizations would lose lots of opportunities maximizing the data. So, I mean, just want to get your thoughts, around that, in terms of what is the right balance here in terms of managing data, because there's going to be data there that, let's just be honest, a lot of people say is the most critical, but there's going to be a lot of things out there that may not be, very critical. So, what are some?
I think, when we say, we use a umbrella term, you need to understand your data. What does that mean? You need to get all your data in one place, in a data lake or something like that. But you need to know what it is you want to get out of it. You need to ask the right questions, be very specific about what value you're expecting to see. Is it market intelligence? Is it a way to extract data to keep the regulators happy, but maybe do it in a different way? I think there's a myriad of ways to extract value, but you want to be very clear about what it is you want to do and the tools you use to do that.
Okay, and we have time for one more question, and then we'll have to end it with that. So next question is, what's the biggest unstructured data security threat today?
Ooh. Data breaches, I presume. Must be. Data breaches, human error.
I could see that happen because the error is human, right?
Yeah.
But and I think it's not even managing your data, not even protecting it, not even knowing.
What about ransomware?
Well, it's all those things, right? Because if you don't protect your data, you're gonna have so many attack vectors into your company and into your data, and that's really the key thing here is knowing what you have, securing it, protecting it. Those are all going to be, very, very important. So I think that was an excellent question. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Hope that you learned a lot of things new. Feel free to contact us. Yeah. Our email is here at solutions@datdyne.com, and our telephone number is here as well if you'd like to just speak to a friendly voice. Thank you, everyone. Danny, thank you so much for your time today. All right, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.